My name is Emily Rains. I'm a Navy SEAL. And yes, I'm a woman. You could hear the surprise ripple through the crowd every time I said that out loud. So I stopped saying it years ago. But that day at my family's backyard barbecue, my silence didn't save me from the sting. The smell of smoked ribs hung in the air, kids darted between picnic tables, and my Uncle Dan's laugh cut through the noise like a blade. "That's just Emily," he said, raising his beer. "She flips tires and gets yelled at for a living." Everyone laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter. Not exactly. Just the kind that lands harder because it pretends to be harmless. I smiled, or at least I tried to. The kind of polite smile you give when you've been insulted so many times it starts to feel like background noise. My hand tightened around the soda can I was holding. I could feel the condensation slide across my palm, cold against skin that suddenly felt too warm. Someone asked if I was still doing that military thing. And I nodded, forcing the air out of my lungs as if it might carry away the anger. Inside, something low and familiar stirred. The same mix of shame and defiance that had followed me since the first day I put on a uniform. Uncle Dan liked to think of himself as a success story. 2 houses, a golf club membership, and a son at Yale. To him, I was the family's cautionary tale. The one who didn't fit the mold didn't follow the plan. I could feel his eyes on me, even as he turned back to his friends, ready to tell another story that made him sound impressive. I stayed quiet, steady, invisible. But in that stillness, I could also feel something else. That quiet, simmering truth I carried every day. He had no idea who he was laughing at. I looked around the yard, at the people who thought they knew me. They saw a girl who'd run from college and landed in the military. They didn't see the years, the miles, the scars, or the choices that had built me into something they couldn't begin to understand. The air felt heavy, thick with barbecue smoke and unspoken words. I took another sip of soda, looked up at the blue summer sky, and thought, someday they'll know, but not yet. Not like this. I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, where the air always smelled like cut grass and diesel. We had 1 grocery store, 2 stoplights, and a whole lot of people who believed girls should smile pretty and stay close to home. I never quite fit into that picture. My dad died when I was 7. A work accident, quick and brutal, the kind of thing no one ever explains right to a kid. After that, it was just me and my mom in a house that always felt too quiet. She loved me, I know she did, but she was scared all the time. Scared I'd get hurt, scared I'd get lost. So she kept her dreams for me, small and safe. I think she believed that was love. I was never the daughter people expected. I preferred climbing trees to playing dress-up, scraped knees over painted nails. My mom used to say, "You'll calm down when you get older." I didn't. At family reunions, I'd be the one kicking a soccer ball in the backyard, while the other girls braided hair and talked about boys. The aunts would glance at me, then whisper just low enough to think I couldn't hear, "That's Judy's girl," still in her tomboy phase. But it didn't feel like a phase to me. It felt like who I was. And the older I got, the more I realized that wasn't something my family welcomed, especially Uncle Dan. Dan was my mom's older brother, the golden boy of the family. He wore expensive watches, gave long speeches at Christmas, and always made sure everyone knew how well his son Jake was doing. Jake got straight, as was captain of the debate team, and already had his college applications in by junior year. At every family event, someone would ask me what I planned to do with my life. I'd shrug or mumble something about not knowing yet. Then the conversation would swing back to Jake. That was the rhythm. Even when I started running track and bringing home ribbons, it barely registered. "That's nice," they'd say. "But what about your grades?" I stopped mentioning my wins. I learned early that no one cared what I could do with my body, only what I could prove on paper. And even then, only if it fit a story they wanted to hear. Sometimes I wondered what my dad would have said. He used to lift me onto his shoulders like I weighed nothing. He made me believe I could do anything, but he wasn't there to remind them. By high school, I'd gotten used to sitting at the edge of every room. Not angry, just apart. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just didn't know how to be something I wasn't. I watched Jake get awards, internships, and attention. I watched my mom beam when someone praised him, even though he barely said a word to me. And I held all of it inside. That hurt became fuel. Quiet, slow-burning fuel. The kind that doesn't roar but doesn't die either. One afternoon, walking home from school with sweat on my back and dirt on my shoes, I passed the Navy recruiting poster in the library window. A woman in uniform stood tall, eyes sharp, face steady. I stopped walking. Something clicked. It wasn't that I wanted to be her. I wanted to become whatever made her look like that. Strong, unbothered, sure of her place in the world. I didn't say anything to anyone that day. I just went home, washed up, ate dinner, and sat through another evening of small talk and local news. But something had shifted. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, spinning shadows across the room, I whispered to myself, I'll show them. One day, they'll see. And I meant it. Every word. The first morning of boot camp hit like a slap. The lights came on at 4:30, blinding, and someone was already shouting before my feet hit the floor. My body moved before my brain caught up, panic and adrenaline crashing through me. We learned to move fast, to line up, to shut up. Sand stuck to the sweat on my neck, my back, and between my fingers. Every inch of my body felt too slow, too soft, not enough. I remember the cold. Not winter cold, but that deep, early morning bite that gets under your skin before the sun burns it away. My breath came in clouds while we stood still and waited for someone to yell again. The drill instructor's voice was like gravel, rough and unforgiving. You think you're tired now? You haven't even begun. He had a way of finding your weakest point and pressing it like a bruise. I got blisters by day 3. They popped, bled, stuck to my socks, and reopened every time we ran. But I didn't stop running. Not once. Some nights, after lights out, I'd stare at the bunk above me and ask myself if I belonged, if I'd made a mistake, if they were right about me. Other girls whispered about going home, about quitting, about how this wasn't what they expected. I stayed quiet. My body ached, but my pride hurt worse. The physical part was brutal, but it was the silence after failure that really messed with your head. No one yelled when you missed a target. They just marked it and moved on. I started to crave the discipline, the structure, the brutal clarity of pass or fail. There was something clean about it. You either made your time or you didn't. No excuses. No one cared where you came from or what you were supposed to be. I failed my first swim call, almost panicked halfway through, came out shaking, breathless, humiliated. The next day, I did it again and again until I passed, until I stopped fearing the water. There was power in that, not being the best, just in refusing to break. Each blister, each shouted correction, each freezing morning carved something out of me, and in that space, something tougher grew back. By week 4, I didn't flinch when they screamed. I moved faster, stood taller, and started to feel my body becoming something sharper. I wasn't there yet, but I could feel it coming, like bones setting under pressure. That's when I realized pain wasn't breaking me. It was building me. When I told my supervisor I wanted to try out for SEAL training, he stared like I'd grown 2 heads. You know what that pipeline does to people, right? He said. Especially women. His words weren't cruel, just honest, in a way that made me feel even smaller. Others laughed. Not always to my face, but loud enough to hear. I pretended not to care. But every smirk added fuel to the fire, already burning in my chest. Bud divided by S didn't wait for you to be ready. It chewed you up from the first hour. We lined up in perfect rows, uniforms stiff with starch, and by sunset, we were soaked, blistered, and coated in sand. The Pacific wasn't just cold, it was hostile. It slammed into you with the force of doubt, numbing your skin and rattling your bones. "Get wet and sandy," the instructors shouted, and we ran into the surf like lunatics, rolled in the sand, and stood there trembling like sugar-dusted statues. They smiled like wolves. We didn't smile back. The log drills broke people fast. Those things weren't just heavy. They were cruel, carried on shoulders rubbed raw, hoisted with trembling arms. And if one person slacked, everyone paid. We barely slept, maybe 3 hours a night if we were lucky. My body started to forget what normal felt like. I lived off muscle memory and stubbornness. Men rang the bell. 3 clangs. Done. I stared at that bell every night like it was whispering to me, but I never moved toward it. There was a moment during Hell Week when I thought I was finished. We were shoulder to shoulder in the surf, waves pounding, moonlight barely cutting through the dark. My lips were blue. My hands were numb. My mind was screaming for warmth. An instructor paced in front of us. "You think this is cold?" he said. "Quitting's warm." A guy next to me broke, ran for the bell. I watched him go and clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. But I didn't move. I didn't cry. I told myself each shiver was a weakness leaving my bones. We kept going. We ran, crawled, swam, bled, over and over. Until pain became background noise. Until failure stopped being an option. And then one morning, they handed me a pin, cold, sharp, heavy with meaning, my trident. I didn't cry, didn't cheer. I just stared at it. Because somehow, through all of it, I had crossed over. I wasn't proving anyone wrong anymore. I was just proving who I'd always been. The night we flew in, the rotors of the chopper sounded like a beast breathing heavy over the desert. We touched down in silence, boots meeting the gravel with soft taps. In night vision green, I saw the compound's outline high walls, shadows deep in every corner. The team stacked up on the breach point while I checked my gear one last time. Our leader whispered, "Gee, oh," and we moved. The door gave way, and we spilled inside. The world suddenly became chaos, gunfire, shouts, and the acrid smell of burnt cordite. The dust hadn't settled when I saw him. He was slumped near the compound's back wall, blood on his shirt, one hand clutching his side. I moved fast, scanning for threats, then dropped to my knees beside him. That's when I saw his face clearly. It hit me like a punch. Jake, my cousin, the golden boy of our family. I stared at him for a second too long, the chaos around me blurring into a haze. He was working as a private contractor, an intel analyst, someone who wasn't supposed to be this close to the fire. He didn't recognize me. Not under the helmet, not behind the dirt-streaked face paint. His eyes barely focused, and when they did, all he saw was another SEAL pulling him out of the fire. "You're gonna be okay," I said quietly, my voice flat to hide the quake in my chest. I tore a strip of gauze, pressed it hard against his side, and whispered to another teammate for evac status. Jake coughed, grimaced, but kept his eyes on me like he was trying to hold on to something solid. I didn't blink. There was no place for family in that moment. Only the mission, only survival. We carried him to the exfil point. His head lolled against my shoulder, breath shallow, but steady. His hand gripped my arm for a second, and then fell away. Still, he didn't know. The helo came in low, kicking up another storm of dust. I helped strap him onto the stretcher, eyes locked on his face the whole time. There was a bruise forming along his cheekbone, a smear of ash in his hair. I reached out once, brushed it away, then stepped back. He was gone in seconds, the bird lifting him toward safety, to a place where he could heal and never know who had been beside him in that firefight. I stood there, the wind from the rotors whipping sand into my eyes, and watched until he disappeared. And then I turned, picked up my rifle, and rejoined the team. Because that's what we do. We leave the personal behind, even when it's everything. The BBQ was winding down. Kids were sticky with melted popsicles. The grill was cooling off, and most of the adults were 3 drinks into stories they'd already told twice. I was sitting in a lawn chair, legs stretched out, sipping a watered-down soda and trying not to be noticed. Dan was in his usual spot, near the cooler, holding court with a fresh beer and loud opinions. He just told someone I probably worked logistics or something, and they all nodded like that made perfect sense. I didn't correct him. I never did. Jake was there, sitting quietly by the fire pit, a slight limp in his walk, the only sign of what had happened 3 months ago. He hadn't said much all day, just watched me with a strange, quiet intensity. Then someone asked him about his consulting trip and how he got injured. The backyard fell quiet. Even the kids stopped running. Jake looked at his hands, then at his father, Uncle Dan. "It wasn't a consulting trip," he said, his voice calm and certain. "I was a contractor at a forward base. We were overrun. I was hit, pinned down. I thought I was dead." Dan blinked. "What are you talking about?" Jake looked right at him, then his eyes moved across the lawn and locked onto me. "I thought I was dead," he repeated, "until one of them came for me. A seal. Small, fast, moved like a panther. Pulled me out of the fire while bleeding from their own arm." He continued, "I didn't see their face. Not really. Not until I was on the helo, and they brushed the ash from my hair. I've been trying to figure it out for months. But I knew that touch." The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. Jake stood up, wincing as he put weight on his bad leg, and walked over to me. He stood in front of my lawn chair. "It was you, wasn't it, Emily?" he asked, his voice cracking just a little. "You were the one who pulled me out." I didn't say anything. I just sat there letting it sink in. I nodded once. That was all. Dan stared like he didn't understand the words. His mouth opened once, then closed. "You were there?" he finally asked, his voice small. "She wasn't just there, Dad," Jake said, his voice shaking with an emotion I couldn't place. "She saved my life." The others shifted uncomfortably. A few murmured things like, "Wow," and "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I shrugged. "Wasn't the kind of thing you bring up over ribs." Dan finally stepped forward, eyes still locked on me. "Why didn't you tell us any of this?" I looked up at him, steady. "Would you have listened?" He flinched. Just slightly. But it was enough. No one laughed now. No jokes. No smirks. Just the hum of summer bugs and the slow drip of melted ice in the cooler. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible in that backyard. I wasn't just Emily. I was a Navy SEAL who had done something that couldn't be denied or twisted into a family punchline. Dan looked away. He picked up his beer, then put it down. And I watched something crack in him. Maybe pride. Maybe certainty. Maybe both. I didn't need applause. I didn't want it. But in that stillness, I felt something shift. They finally saw me, not as a daughter, not as a niece, not as someone who didn't fit. They saw me for what I was, strong, capable, proven. Jake squeezed my shoulder once before heading back toward the house, and I leaned back in my chair, let the night settle, and finally let myself breathe. The backyard was quiet again. Most of the family had packed up, the grill covered, folding chairs stacked. I was gathering empty cups when I heard his footsteps behind me. Dan didn't say anything at first, just stood there, awkward like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. Then he cleared his throat and said, "You got a minute?" I nodded and followed him around to the side of the house, where the porch light didn't quite reach. He leaned against the siding, arms crossed, but his voice was softer than I'd ever heard. "I didn't know," he said. "I figured," I answered. The words felt flat, not angry, just tired. He looked down at the ground. "I've said a lot of crap over the years. Most of it was out of ignorance. Some of it, if I'm honest, was out of fear. That caught me off guard." I raised an eyebrow. "Fear?" he sighed. "You remind me too much of your dad. Stubborn, quiet, never let anyone in. And when you joined up, I didn't know how to deal with that. You made a different choice. One I never had the guts to make." I stood there, arms folded, listening. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was close. "I used to joke because I didn't want to admit I was wrong," he continued. didn't want to admit you'd grown into someone I don't even recognize now. I let the silence hang between us for a second. Then I said, every time you made one of those jokes, I took it with me. Not because it hurt, because I needed it. He blinked. Needed it? Yeah, I said. You made it easy to walk away, to push harder. I didn't want to prove you wrong. I just wanted to prove myself right. He nodded slowly, looking off into the trees like he was trying to process that. Jake told me what you did, that you never said a word. You could have. I didn't need to, I said. It wasn't about you. We stood there for another beat. No fireworks, no hugs, just the weight of things finally said. Dan shifted his weight and looked at me. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know, I said, not with anger, just truth. He nodded once, then turned back toward the yard. I stayed behind, letting the stillness settle. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something close, and maybe that was enough. Sometimes I think about that little girl in Arkansas, the one with scraped knees and too many questions. She didn't know what was waiting down the road, how heavy the weight of silence could be, or how far grit would take her. But she kept going anyway. I think about the nights in the barracks, the smell of sweat and steel, the ache that settled deep in my bones and never really left. I think about the first time I stood in formation, terrified and unsure, and the last time I watched a comrade fall. Those moments shaped me. There were days I wanted to quit, not just from exhaustion, but from the feeling of never being enough for the people I loved. But every time I hit that wall, I found a way to push through. The battlefield taught me a lot, not just about tactics or survival, but about who I was when no one else was watching. And when the world said I didn't belong, I let my actions do the talking. My family sees me now, some of them differently, some of them for the first time. But the truth is, I didn't become this for them. I did it for me. For the kid who never fit in and the woman who found her strength in proving she didn't have to. They used to say I was just a girl, just enlisted, just a soldier. Let them. I'm not just anything. I'm Emily Rains. And I'm still here,